My name's Tom Rayom. I'm chairman of the Public Works Committee. We're meeting this evening at 5:15 p.m. Tuesday, July 18th, 2017. We're in the first floor conference room in City Hall. This is a special meeting that we have this evening before our regular council meeting. Item number one, first we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Steve Colt, alderperson.
Joe Terry, Director of Public Works.
Joe Eichstead, City Engineer.
Dan Kubiszak, alderperson.
Rick Pakolka, Reggie.
Bob Walker from the Village of Barron.
Sean Bergen with Reggie.
Joe Bakken, Wisconsin Rapid City Times.
Scott Kelly, Alderman.
Thank you. Item number one, review municipal agreement counter proposal from the Village of Barron to connect the recreational trails between the village and city. We have a couple proposals here, I guess, in front of us.
Right, so there's two proposals. Bob, did you want to address?
Yeah, I certainly could. I was expecting John to be here. I was actually maybe not expecting to be here, and
Okay.
John to be here, but I'll win it.
Okay, do you need copies?
Yeah, no, I have them.
I must have got waylaid a little bit.
What we have on this, just looking at it as a background on this, the bottom line is what we're discussing is the bidirectional trail linking Buren's existing trail to the trail that's planned as part of the current phase of your First Street project. That bidirectional trail link would be approximately 180 feet. It runs from the boundary of our respective municipalities to the end of Buren's existing trail. So connecting to your trail has some advantages for the Village of Buren. It would give our trail access to the less than half mile of trail that you guys are developing along the river in Wisconsin Rapids. Now, half mile's nice, but a half mile's not very much. So as such, it makes physical sense for us to agree to such a connection only if the costs are very low. Unfortunately, despite a really, I think, a very sincere effort on everyone's part, we couldn't get that price down to less than where it currently stands at $25,000 for that connection. That was the last proposal that we got from the city. When we were, just as a little background on that, we were told on June 23rd that we needed to make a decision by June 28th on that proposal. So we did meet on June 28th. The city gave us three basic options there. The $25,000 proposal to not do the trail but realign the road, which would facilitate it, for $15,000, or to just match where the roads match up now, which would be the zero cost option. Our village board met, we discussed it at length, and finally came to the conclusion we're just going to go with that $0 option, just match right where the lines come up now. So that is where we stood on June 28th. That's the vote we took and communicated that message back. Subsequent to that, and this I'll just say that I guess the city wanted to continue discussing that thing, and so we did. I think Rick Bakova here was enlisted to kind of facilitate that discussion. We met once. Joe, was it?
Twice total. But
Twice total, yeah. We have met. And in the interim of the meeting, that's not the only time we've talked. I think there's been a lot of thinking on this, a lot of back and forth on it. But ultimately, in looking at what you could do with that, because the river and the road are close, there's not a whole lot of space. Joe, you can speak. The $25,000 option is where it is. That's the best option that you guys can engineer. That's the message that Joe has consistently given us, and the guy's an engineer. I respect his view. I mean, we've talked a lot about, could we do this? Could we do that? $25,000 is where it comes down to. So what we have to look at as a village then is access to a half mile trail worth $25,000? Because your trail is less than half a mile. Is access to a half mile trail worth $25,000? Honestly, if I were confronted with anyone in the village who asked me that, I'd say, that's a hard sell. I don't think so. So John, so we know the project's moving along. I mean, decisions have to be made. And so John and I got together last night, yesterday evening, and said, well, how could we present a resolution to that? And those are the proposals that you see in front of you today. It's either match the road, which doesn't cost us anything, it's just your project then matching the road. realigning the road without the trail, which would allow the trail to be developed later if conditions warranted it to do so. But again, we don't want to commit the $15,000 that was in your original proposal to do that. Say, if you want to realign the road, okay, we'll let you on the property, you realign the road. It's not like our road needs to be repaired, it's a brand new road. So there's really not that much in it for us to realign the road. So that's why that one proposal that you have there is realign the road at the city's expense. And of course, the third option, this is the one that I think John and I struggled with a little bit. The third one is the only one that I guess we can't, from Buren's standpoint, we couldn't even promise a delivery on that today, because John and I met on that last night. And we thought, okay, we're thinking access to a half mile of trail, not worth $25,000. What is it worth? And you know, I think historically we've looked at this as how much does it cost? But we gotta look at it as how much is it worth? And after we went back and forth on a couple different numbers, 10,000 is the number we came up with. That's still gonna be a hard sell. If somebody in Buren comes up to me and said, why are you hooking up to a half mile trail and spending $10,000 of our money on it? I'd say, well, we think maybe the city's gonna continue that trail, it's gonna get longer, it's gonna connect to more things later. We hope it does. I think you hope it does. But hope is not a plan. Hope is not a commitment. So that's where we are. That's the background and the whole kind of the genesis of those two proposals. We recognize as much talk as we've done on this, and I think everybody's been committed to seeing, can we make this happen? We're at a point, the construction crews are out there. You know what it looks like. We have to make decisions. And so we thought, these are the offers that we have here. Again, we can fall back on the one that we approved on June 28th, which is just line up the road and move on. Or we can go with the realignment of the road, which would facilitate the trail development at a later date if conditions warranted. And personally, if that trail stays at a half mile, I am never going to support connecting to it for $25,000. If the trail gets longer, I'll reconsider that. But right now, it's a half mile, a little less than half a mile. And so I can't justify committing Buren to $25,000 for that. The $10,000 commitment, actually maybe I could justify by saying, well, we hope they're going to extend that. We hope it's going to go to downtown Rapids as a bi-directional trail that is separated from the road. All it would take to do that is the connection between the railroad tracks and Riverview Street. That would get it to downtown. If you wanted to talk about getting it to Nakusa or Port Edwards, you've got to talk about how are you going to get through downtown, because right now there isn't a trail there. And then you do also have a little bit of an on-street segment right now. I believe it would probably be First Avenue, just north of the Expressway Bridge, that little residential street. So, you know, the on-street connection is okay for what we're talking about here. We're okay with that. Right now, your trail, if you went from Buren to Nakusa, you'd hit 4 on-street connections once your project is done. This would be a 5th. The 5th isn't that big a deal. If you get rid of the other on-street connections over time, then it becomes a little bit more attractive to tie into a longer trail. But right now, all we have to deal with right now is not what we hope to have in the future, but what we're going to have for sure is a half-mile trail. And that's what you want us to hook up to. We're willing to do that, but $25,000 is too much for Buren to pay for that. So that's the background on where those proposals come from. We can certainly answer any questions I think that you have about it and discuss it further if you'd like.
Mayor?
I have a clarifying question. The segment that terminates at the corporate limits of the Buren Rapids line, which we're talking about, that trail that's in your corporate limits that goes, how long is the segment?
180 feet approximately. These guys can probably tell you more accurately.
Into your corporate limits up to the trail that dead ends at?
About by the village hall?
Yeah.
About 2 miles. It's a little less than 2 miles.
So you're concerned about a half-mile trail segment connection to your 2-mile trail segment that doesn't go anywhere either? Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Well, it's a combination of that and cost. I mean, all of us had to evaluate the cost benefit, because there's a cost benefit thought process that we go through. And we just got done constructing a significant amount of trail at a much lesser cost per foot. So it's a combination, Mayor, of both, you know, the distance involved, what we're actually, you know, what are we connecting to, what's the gain here, versus just utilizing the roadway and the cost. So it's really two factors.
And I don't, you know, I'm not trying to put any blame on anyone for the cost of the 25. If you want to put blame on it, the blame comes from the fact that we got a road and a river that are close together. That's where the blame is. And in order to kind of work something in, the solution becomes expensive. And so the question then becomes, is it worth the cost? Not is the cost accurately calculated, because I trust these guys. They're good people, and they're principled people. If that's what it costs, that's what it costs. Then we got to decide, is that's what it's worth? And if the answer is no, that's not what it's worth, then we don't do it.
Certainly, the design component factored into, because we realize that the design component factors into the cost. You know, $25,000 for a couple hundred feet of trail is a pretty significant amount of money. That's driven by the design. We were not all of us were on the same page with the design. And there's elements of the proposals that came from the city that changed from the spring to the summer when some design changes were made. So, but even with those changes, still the current design that's out there is driving that cost upward in comparison to what possibly a different engineered design might result in.
Possibly.
We don't know that
Yeah,
for sure.
John and I are not going to come agree entirely on
Right.
that.
Well, and I have to agree with Bob in that we really don't know.
We don't know.
You know, get rid of the retaining wall. What does that do to the cost? Get rid of the beam guard. What does that do to the cost? And you know, we can make some assumptions, but without the hard data, it's difficult to really conclude, you know, what those elements are doing with the cost per foot. Did you cover the?
I did I shouldn't say that.
The two options?
Yes. Well, they have those. Yeah.
Right.
And
Was
then-
there any discussion with regard to payments over a number of years? I mean, I think when you look at 25,000, it's a lot of money for a year.
It's
But
that
over
really,
3 years or
it
4
doesn't
years.
factor.
You know, I have thought about that because I know that concept was proposed. But the bottom line on that is that it's still $25,000.
Okay.
You know, and so at that point, I keep circling back to that point. Is it worth $25,000 for connection to a half mile of trail? And the answer, no.
Steve?
Just kind of going on what I see here, I understand where the village is coming from. They're here as representatives of their constituents, trying to figure out where to invest their money and how to invest it and what to do with it. Just like we're here as representatives of our constituents, trying to make the same decisions that are best for our citizens and how we're going to spend their money to do projects like this. I guess my feelings on it is if we're not going to agree on a number, just postpone it until we do something more with our trail, maybe expand it more the other way and work on some of make our trail, build it up so it's going the other way more.
And if I could interject there, realignment of that trail, of the road, is necessary for that. If that road doesn't get realigned, there's never going to be I shouldn't say, there's never a never. There's always a way.
There's always options.
You build a bridge out over the river and connect it. But in terms of economic, what's cost effective, realigning the road would facilitate the plan that you currently have. And that plan is good. It's there. It works. And realigning the road would facilitate that if we wanted to pursue that down the road.
John?
If I may, Mr. Chair, the frustrating part of this for us is that, we're on board. I mean, we agree that a trail connection would be positive. right from the onset, we're willing to put money toward that. We've never been in a position where we want this for nothing. We're willing to make what we would consider a reasonable investment toward that connection. We're on board with shoreline stabilization. That was mentioned at the first meeting on site that we had with your engineering staff. We thought that to be necessary, wise, and we appreciate the fact that that's being done. We're on board with the idea of realigning the roadway slightly so that the option to create an off-road trail segment exists, either now or today or in the future. So I mean, there's 4 or 5 pretty significant items that we're in agreement on, and we're close on this. But again, the cost benefit for what the end game is certainly there. For some of us, the design component is not what we want to see, and you know, those are the hang-ups. And certainly the fact that we've got a new roadway there, and you know, from my position, my job is to protect the new roadway and make sure that whatever happens in that corridor happens, you know, in a well planned out way and in a way that protects our current investment, the investment we've already made in the roadway. And that brings me to the third option. If neither of these proposals are acceptable, and if there isn't a municipal agreement, you know, then nothing happens in the Buren corporate limits. And you know, and there's been some discussion at the meetings we've attended about you know, possibly an intention to come into Buren with a partial realignment. You know, potentially begin the trail segment as the city's engineered it, and then terminate it at the village line. And you know, certainly those are some of those thoughts that were communicated to us is what drove these proposals, and an attempt on our part to find a compromise position that we could all live with.
Yeah, and of course, as you're well aware, the actual municipal boundary does not run perpendicular to the road. It runs at a very weird diagonal angle through the road. So that does complicate it. If it was, you know, 90-degree angle, things get a lot simpler, but it's not. That's what we had.
Joe, with what Steve had to say, what is that in this?
Well, I think one of the issues with this project or looking at other ones is, you know, when we're trying to make connections, whether it's with a trail in the corporate limits of the city or with a neighboring municipality, you know, we're trying to take advantage of opportunities. On this particular project, you know, we're rebuilding the road. The opportunity exists to have the trail realigned. There's been some discussion with Consolidated Water Power about you know, the future of the trail, perhaps along Riverview, but that's just very preliminary at this stage. None of these trail segments in any community that exists today was all done at one time. You know, the trail system from Rapids to Port Edwards was done in phases. The trail system from Port Edwards to Nakusa was done in phases. And none of them were just, let's build it all at once, and if we don't build it all at once, we won't build it. So, you know, it was my hope that we could make a connection. You know, it would extend. Certainly, I think that the trail system that exists is used. I've walked that way myself. You know, from the river all the way up to Buren, and I think with the trail there, certainly I think we're going to see a lot more pedestrian use of that area, and hopefully bicycle activity as well. You know, the riverfront itself is a great feature that the city is committed in enhancing and trying to exploit it for its natural beauty. And you know, this project's certainly an opportunity to do that. It would be challenging to, I think, to try to end the trail and make a future, you know, an unknown connection in a way where there wouldn't be some aesthetic compromises until which time the connection is made. Now, for example, if we ended it at Strawberry Lane, in order to make this trail fit and follow with all practical possibilities the Wisconsin facility manual for bicycle design, we would need to install that retaining wall along the river. And the construction of that wall needs to be done before the road is done. There are features, there's some geotextile fabric, there's things that would actually be underneath the road. It wouldn't allow it to happen in the future without tearing up the road. And so, at the same time, we wouldn't necessarily be desirable to have a trail dead end mid-block. For a pedestrian, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. You can turn around and walk the other way. But for someone on a bicycle, there's an issue with that. Potentially someone's going to be motivated to go cross country or do something maybe that's not as safe as it should be. So the reality is that if we don't have the connection, in all likelihood we'll have to stop pavement at Strawberry Lane and prepare the infrastructure work to continue it to the corporate limits, but not pave it. I don't think it's going to be, is aesthetically nice to the residents that are there. It's certainly not going to meet the expectations that staff has. We want to be extremely proud of this project and something that I would want to, live right there myself. So, I think there's some. It'd be unfortunate, but we can make it work. And if the opportunity, and we tried the best we could to make an opportunity happen. If it can't, it can't.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I guess I use that trail, and certainly would like to see the trails in this area extended, okay? It would seem that it would be good to work on some type of long-range plan that would say that, in X amount of years here, we are going to be able to connect all of these trails, all right? Perhaps that would bring Buren's buy-in here, okay? I use that trail regularly for biking, okay? The part that exists. I think there are a lot of people who do. It's fairly busy. What is the plan as far as connecting that segment on to the river trail, which now exists, which then also connects with the Port Edwards trail and so on? Is there a long-range plan that is fit here?
There is a long-range plan, and it's existed for all of 10 years. We've got this intergovernmental bike and ped plan that falls in alignment with our rec plan for the community, which we have to adopt statutorily. So there is a long-range plan. It's been in existence. This route has been identified in there as a connecting point. I would say it would not be connected via timeline because of financial constraints of which have been identified. Now, in terms of the segment with the railroad crossing, that's dependent upon CN granting a crossing for us, which is highly unlikely, if not impossible, unless we close a crossing elsewhere. So we've talked with them about that to identify maybe a timeline for that work. But at this point, that remains the situation there. I think I would suggest to the committee that deferring a connection for a future date come off the table. I really think that we are at a juncture whether or not the trail connection is going to happen now or it'll never happen. And I think that's just, we're at that point, and we have to accept that fact and maybe swallow some of our, what we feel as stewards of the public's resources when we're constructing a public improvement that's going to last for decades, if not in perpetuity, right? So I wanted just to comment on your piece related to timeline and long-range plan, but they are in existence, and this is such that we're in the situation we're in. So
I guess in view of that long-range plan, is there not a way that Buren could see their way clear to?
Actually, John, I would say, because I agree with that, I agree with what Joe was saying there. We're aware that you have intention on the plan. And in fact, our $10,000 offer for that connection is a representation of that. If all we were looking at, if all we believed in is you're gonna leave a less than half-mile trail section alone, we wouldn't be here. We would have said, no, you're crazy. The fact that we're willing to put that $10,000 down on that is, in a sense, a belief in that you are gonna go continue that sometime, hopefully soon. Because right now, all we're getting for $10,000 is access to half a mile of trail.
And that $10,000, again, without seeing the exact cost breakdowns, the $10,000 is paying for the trail pavement from Buren to the corporate limits. It's also paying for a safety rail system along the river. You know, the initial proposal that came to us back in April that really got the attention of the village board was a $40,000 proposal, of which more than half of that $40,000 was the handrail, was just the rail along the trail of the river. More than half. And we said, come on now. This is crazy. We got to be able to do better than that. And to the engineering department's credit, they did. They came back and they dropped that $22,000 handrail system down to $6,000 by using a modified system, a more simple system, but yet one that's going to be aesthetically okay and one that'll be functional. So, our $10,000 pledge pretty much by and large pays for the pavement from our existing trail to the corporate limits, and again, without seeing the exact breakdowns, is very close, and our $6,000 worth of our cost or our share of that safety handrail system. What it probably doesn't cover is the retaining wall, which, we're at odds on that system. We're not on board, not all of us are. And the grade separation expenses to drop that trail down below the roadway surface, the excavation into the riverbank. So we think it's a generous pledge because, again, I've got to go back and sell it to my board. I'm pretty confident I can, particularly with Bob's support, because the board recognizes that of our board members, Bob is the most advocate biker and most familiar with trails in Wisconsin and elsewhere.
It's a tough one. I really appreciate it. I think we'd all like to see if this had come through as, it'll cost $2,000 to do that, or $3,000. We'd say, hallelujah, let's do it. It doesn't, and it doesn't. And again, this is where I don't want to try to blame us. I don't want to try to blame you. But the blame lies in the fact that you got houses, road, river. There's not a whole lot of room in between that. And so it did take some really creative work by your engineering staff to come up with a solution that would even work, much less economical. But still, at $25,000, that's where we come back to. Is that connection worth $25,000 to Buren? I gotta say no.
Trails involve compromise, folks. And we just got done building for our size community, a pretty significant length of trail segment. And even with property acquisition, a significant property acquisition to expand right away, we still ended up compromising, and we were unable to meet the state code on trail construction through that entire area. The majority of it meets the state guidelines, and we applaud the state guidelines. We understand why they're there. And certainly you've got to strive for that in every possible location you can. But as Bob mentioned, when you've got limited right-of-way, you've got a natural obstruction like a river, you've got Quintle Creek, there's just so much you can do within reason and cost.
Jill?
I guess I can just offer some clarifying points for the city's more immediate trail connection plans. Obviously, this section of First Street North is what's proposed with an off-street bike trail. If we continue to move south along the roadway, once we hit Riverview Drive, at that location, the city's current plans, which will be implemented with the completion of the First Street project this year, pavement markings will be placed on First Street from Riverview Drive south, past railroad tracks. That will provide on-street accommodations for bicyclists. There is a sidewalk for pedestrians. That'll get, those accommodations will come down to Love Street. At Love Street, the bicyclists can then go off-street again onto the recreational trail that continues south into Legion Park. And then once we hit Veterans Park, Mead Rapids View Park, those locations along with 2nd Street in the East Riverbank Conservancy, and then moving south into Demons Park and the Expressway, those are all part of the city's Riverbank project with DNR stewardship funding that's in the works to get a recreational trail and trail connection at the Riverview Expressway. So there's some very immediate things on the table to make the connection, connect in with the existing network and get to Port Edwards, Nakusa, out towards Grand Rapids.
So the rest of this trail is currently in the design phase right now.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
if I might.
Rick.
Mayor had asked me to chat with both sides here. I just wanted to report to your committee that I wish the public would have been able to sense and see the discussions between Joe and John and Bob and the village board. Very respectful, very accommodating toward each other and what we're trying to accomplish. It is just very much sad that all the parties here agree on what's good for the community and connecting these roads and trails. And there's so much agreement and so little disagreement that it sure would be nice if both sides could find some middle ground to accommodate this, because we know it's good for the community, we know it's good for the future of the trail. We know both sides have put a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of understanding of each other's position into getting to here. And for it not to happen sure does seem sad.
Mr. Chairman.
Mayor?
I know Joe had sent an email indicating some of the cost share expectations that were sort of built into the proposal as it stands, and as I understood by reading them, there's an expectation of the village, by the village of the city to pay, and maybe you want to just iterate those for us. Yeah, just because I think it's important for committee discussion and subsequently the council decision here at 6 o'clock tonight.
Sure, so the street realignment is estimated to be around $15,000, and that includes the engineering costs. And that's outside the corporate limits of the city. The trail costs were estimated, I think it was around $20,588 or some rough number like that. But with contingencies and any other unknown costs for some of the riverbank restoration work, the estimate there was $25,000. So, the cost share outside the corporate limits with the original proposal after the railing modification was about $15,000 worth of actual construction and engineering costs for the roadway by the city outside the corporate limits, and then asking the village to contribute $25,000, including contingencies for the trail. If we were to do the proposal to relocate the roadway, there would be about a $15,000 cost to the city and a zero cost to the village. We would remain without a trail connection. The other proposal would be about a $30,000 cost to the city, about a $10,000 cost to the village, and that would result in a connection, a trail connection. So those are kind of the options that you have before you.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just have to add, I think I may have noted, well, we could commit to those two, the no-cost option, or, well, I guess the no beer and cost option tonight. The $10,000 one is one that John and I are 2 guys out of 7 on that beer and board. It went down, so I can't promise it. It's the best that John and I could do in preparation for a meeting today. So that's where we're at. But it's not, we can't sign anything today without our board's approval.
Mr. Chairperson, if we can't even talk about the $10,000 one, it's moot, and I would take the recommendation of the mayor to take any proposed, I guess, postponement off the table, and look at what we've got. And with the amount of money that we've already spent on this, with engineering costs and the amount that we've reached out to our neighbors to the north, I think that we're at an impasse. And although I'm not on the committee, I'm going to be voting against this proposal on the council floor.
So that'd be stop at the corporate limits.
Well, we can't even,
Right.
they acknowledge that
Right.
they haven't even,
Yeah.
they've only got one proposal here. There's two of them, but one of them legally isn't even, where it's too
Yeah.
right.
Yep.
So, I mean, this is, really, this ain't even a negotiation.
That 0% that they would pay, does that do with the realignment of the road?
Right, so to make the road align, what we feel would be, an ideal alignment, given the constraints that are there, and to allow for that, that grade separation trail that is designed, that realignment would be necessary.
And that would cost,
About $15,000.
and what I hear you say too, is that in that area, that if we don't do that, the finished road would be a problem for the residents of that area.
No, I think it's, it wouldn't necessarily be the roadway that I'd be proud of. We'd have a situation where we'd have a road that was narrower than our standard roads. We'd be asking people to leave a trail, now go on a narrower road, right, and go that extra block to the corporate limits and beyond until they, to get to the Buren Trail, and have to take a road that's narrower than what it was. The real reason why we designed it this way was for the connection. It's not that there's, it still meets standards. It still is well larger than minimum design standards, so there's not an issue there. But certainly, it certainly wouldn't be. Maybe I'm speaking on behalf of the engineering department a bit too, but wouldn't be the project that I would be the most proud of.
Steve?
Hey, question for Joe. What is the absolute drop dead date on this, on our construction of when we would need to have a decision?
I think we've essentially passed it already. We've ordered the retaining wall block, and it's part of it's material related, part of it is permit related. We are still waiting for the DNR to give us a final signature on the chapter 30 permit. We've ordered the retaining wall block. There is a, that's not just something that's in stock. We did a much larger than normal block so that it's robust, it's reasonably easy to construct, but there's a time factor. I mean, really, those materials needed to be ordered. It was early June, so the city's ordered the materials to bring that wall to the corporate limits. If there were an agreement to move the project forward, we would order the other materials. We'd have to juggle our Washington Street project and potentially juggle crews around to make something happen. It would certainly be a challenge. So, when we set the initial deadline, it was a planning deadline. Everything else that we've been discussing has been, kind of trying to do whatever we can do to facilitate the project.
So we ordered these materials. What would happen tonight if Buren doesn't approve on the $10,000 at their village board? What would happen at that point in time?
Well, I don't think we would order materials until that was complete. I mean,
We
I don't
would
think
look
that
at,
would take
John?
months.
a couple things. First of all, in the absence of a trail, had you just engineered a roadway and said, we're we're looking at less than a half mile trail between what Buren would have and what the city would have to Riverview. Let's just focus on the roadway now, but let's realign it so that we've got some space to work with in the future. You know, we agreed with that, okay? And we would have agreed with just the road realignment at no cost to Buren. And why is that? You're disturbing a new roadway. We've already built our roadway and paid for it. The fact that you would want to relocate the roadway slightly to create some future options for a trail, we commend that, but that cost should be yours, again, because you're disturbing a new roadway that we just paid for. That would be the normal way municipalities would work. We would allow it. We'd allow you in our corporate limits. We'd allow you to redo the construction, but at your expense. That wouldn't be uncommon at all. Now, if you were to embrace the $10,000 offer, you know, I'd call for a special board meeting. I don't want to wait till August 14th or whatever. And it would be that'd be a significant change in position from the city, and one that, you know, since Bob and I put it out there, we would certainly be advocating for it. We can't guarantee what the board's going to do, but again, by and large, the board supported the connection. They supported the road realignment. They supported the revised handrail and guard and fence system. They supported stabilization of the riverbank. They supported a cost share. It was never about, we don't want to spend any money here. So, I mean, that's a lot to work with from our standpoint. And when we're going back to our board and saying, hey, we have what we think is a reasonable counter or an acceptance of our counter, and we'd like you to support it, pretty confident it would happen.
Scott, I kind of like the idea of the realignment. I mean, if you're going to do it now, the cost is going to even be more expensive in the future. You got all the truck them in, everything out there. It seems to me the realignment now, then in the future, the connections can be made. That's just my feeling. So. Okay.
Well, with this project, we can realign the road to the corporate limits, essentially, and then you know, within a few feet of where the skew is, you know, taper back to match. So, you know, I wouldn't say that, you know, the issue would be that at some point in time, again, it just depends on the design, what would have to happen outside the city's corporate limits, you know, whatever design was chosen. You know, we can get our trail to the corporate limits and make that happen. And that's what we've intended to do now for the last, you know, good part of a month. So,
How would you terminate your trail at the corporate limits if there's a 3 to 4 foot grade separation from where your trail is and where the soil is currently?
yeah, we do that work in conjunction with the permit that we'll have from the DNR and end it. You know, we wouldn't pave it likely to that termination point.
Okay, so you'd have an
unpaved
unpaved
area.
segment, maybe where the grade separation begins. That makes sense.
Steve? Joe?
I was just going to say, if it's possible, I mean, if the city would go to the corporate limits with the trail and as we have planned, that if the village is still open to, willing to spending the $10,000, that you know, that the village could still possibly make a connection in conjunction with some of the city's project. You know, whatever design characteristics that the village would like. You know, it might be a way to facilitate an actual connection. The cost is more favorable. The cities, I mean, we'd be good. We know we can make it work at the corporate limits. Just a thought.
Steve has something here, I guess.
I'd like to put forward a motion, and it's gonna kind of be two things here, so let's see how this works out. I would like to make a motion for the city of Wisconsin Rapids to make the connection to the Buren Trail at a cost to the city of $10,000 as outlined in the contract, contingent on the Village of Buren, their board approving the contract that they have brought forth to us. If Buren does not approve the contract, that as an alternate, the city would then just go ahead with the village's permission and do the realignment option and move forward in that direction.
I'd second that.
And if I could, I think the only thing that we need on that motion would be a time limit from Buren, so if they could have their special meeting before the end of the week to get back to us, so our construction crews could know what direction they need to take.
Joel?
Is there, so there'll be an additional $15,000 the city will have to pay to make that happen,
I'm assuming my mind with the cost is.
right? Where we gonna pull that from a different project, or?
They mentioned about possibly reworking the Washington Street project
You wanna shorten that?
if we have to do this.
Because your motion would have city taxpayers paying for the trail connection in excess of the 10,000, right? Just so I understand the intent.
Money.
Yeah, so we're gonna pull, so your motion then would have the city taxpayers committed to funding the trail connection to the Buren termination point, not to the corporate limits, but into the village of Buren. Is that, I'm understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what, if we want to make this connection, that's what we have to do. If this is going to turn out to be something that is going to be heavily utilized, but it's contingent on Buren approving their end of it. If their village board doesn't approve their end of it, then we can just go ahead and leave it for a future option with the roadway realignment.
So what is this all, the motion here, Joe?
So I've got a motion to approve the intergovernmental agreement between the city of Wisconsin Rapids and the village of Buren that includes the city paying for the roadway at an estimated cost of $15,000 and contributing towards the Buren's trail project outside the corporate limits for another $15,000.
Okay, any more further discussion? I'll turn this over to the committee, I guess.
I just look at it as, if you don't do it now, the cost might be even more expensive. And we can talk to Tim as to where these funds can be obtained. But it just seems like it's, we almost have to go through it at this time. That's my feeling.
Steve, do you have any further thing to
I
add?
think the motion is what it is. And
Okay, committee will vote. All in favor, respond by aye.
I
Opposed? Aye. Or nay, whichever.
Motion to adjourn?
Nope, I move to adjourn.
second.
All in favor?
I'm going to be a few minutes